In part 2 of the interview, George Tonks exposed some pretty disgusting things Mr. Leslie Wexner did to him at a Hilton Hotel in the late 80s, early 90s. Mr. Tonks also exposes the Department of Justice and the FBI for calling him an anti-Semitic liar when he brought actual evidence in the form of files, pictures, and videos to their attention. Disclaimer: the views of Mr. Tonks are not the views of Night and Day Network, LLC. The stories you hear in this interview are alleged. We cannot confirm or deny, rather these stories are true or false. One thing we do know, there is definitely sickness in this world, and there have been many whistleblowers that expose the debauchery of the so-called global elite, and nothing so far has been done about it. Justice has yet to be served in defense of the young and innocent. Hopefully, one day, just one day, righteousness will prevail.
And so there was so much going on, and it was so strange because as soon as I came in contact with the entire crew, and they were very proud to refer to themselves as the Jew crew. They had no issues with that. And that's what they would call themselves. Mm-hmm. So when I came in contact with the crew, you would not believe how much they did in one day. It was like they went to bed at around 1 a.m. and they were up and out by 6 a.m. I mean, as far as there was no sleep at all. And how they were able to do so much. I know that they were using drugs, mainly Librium, mm-hmm. which is not an upper. But Alan used to use speed. I never actually saw Leslie use speed, but I did witness Leslie use Librium. And what Alan would do, and Leslie would joke around about it too, Alan would put speed in the coffee of his salespeople at the store, and he would joke around about it because he would say that they would be able to sell more if they were high off of speed.
Were they ever aware?
To sell more clothes.
Were they aware of the methamphetamine in there?
No. And they would joke around about drugging the goyim. They would always refer to non-Jewish people as goyim. And they would always talk about how stupid my parents were. And before I met them, I was close to my mom and dad. I didn't have any problems with my mother and father. But they would convince me that my mom and dad were stupid goyim. And they were constantly repeating that. So my relationship with my mom and dad at the time changed. And then they would make us watch tapes, old Holocaust black and white movies. And later on, they were color movies. And they would make us watch these movies. And then they would talk about the Goyim and what the Goyim did to the Jews. And it was just, there was so much going on. And then on Sunday morning, they would actually dance around the apartment whenever Leslie would stay at Alan's house. And Leslie had apartments in Chicago, but at times they would even stay at a hotel. And Alan and Leslie would dance around the apartment watching Black Baptist Church show Sunday morning. And then they would joke around and Leslie would go, ha, ha, ha. There's a Leslie Wexner dress. There's an Alan Kramer fur coat. And they would dance around the house watching Black Baptist church shows with people jumping up and down and clapping. And they would make fun of them. And that's what they looked forward as far as doing Sunday morning, which was odd.
Yeah. With the films, the Holocaust films, how many boys would watch a film at a time? And how many boys would you say were generally there? That you recall at any moment?
At any moment, there were no more than approximately 5 at a moment. And they would try to keep us separated, and they always wanted to keep competition between them. I mean, for instance, when they had a party, there were a lot of boys. And we're talking a lot. We're talking 15 to 20, maybe even more at times. Now, the Mafia parties, there were a lot of boys. But when it came to just us watching the Holocaust films, at the most, I remember maybe 5. And we would sit around. They had a sofa that was built in, and we would sit there, and they would make us watch these movies. And then they would talk about everything that the Goyim did to the Jews and how horrible Goyim is.
With the other boys there, do you remember anything of their backgrounds? Were they
Okay, I was always looked upon like I was put on a pedestal. A lot of them were very poor, and they were not from wealthy families. Most of them were runaways that were actually like staying at friends' homes that Alan set up, as far as them meeting their friends, and they would stay at their home. And for some reason, I don't know why, you had so many of them coming from like Iowa and Nebraska. And they would actually have Lance go to Iowa and pick up boys and bring them back. Lance was Lillian H. Florsheim's hairdresser. And he was originally from Iowa. And he would actually go to Iowa and meet the boys and bring them back. Now, how he met them in Iowa, I don't know, but he would bring them in from Iowa. They had them living in apartments everywhere with older men, or even in the beginning, they had them staying in hotel rooms at the Abbott Hotel in Chicago on Belmont, or they would have them at the YMCA on Chicago Avenue.
no?
Because,
No, go ahead.
yes, at a couple of times, I would actually go and sleep at the YMCA on Chicago Avenue. Okay. And it was crazy because they had a theater called the Bijou Theater, and they created not adult films, but they created like films with young boys, underage boys. So they had these films that they created at the Bijou Theater, which they did photograph me there. And the FBI has those photographs when they raided my apartment in New York, because I had the photos in an accordion file. I had a few of the pictures because they had given me photos, and I had kept them for years. And I was nude. I was very young at the time. And they would send boys to the Bijou Theater to be photographed. And then later on, they made it very clear that they would send the videos to different adopts throughout the United States. And they were filmed in Chicago. And see, that's what a lot of people don't know either. That Chicago was like a main hub at one point for the gay community in the 70s and early 80s. And it was a very leather scene. There were leather shops, S&M shops. And what's strange, though, is the amount of young kids that were runaways back then. And they were like, for instance, if they were gay, they were coming from all over the Midwest, and they were coming to Chicago.
With the boys
it was like a hub.
Yep. With the boys that you would, so no more than 5 at a time. What sort
Watching
of length?
the movies.
Watching the movies. And during
Yes.
what length of time did you, like, what was your recollection with those boys? During how many months would you see them? Were there times when you wouldn't see them? There would be more boys brought in. What was your sense of the sort of turnover?
That's what everyone was scared of too, because everyone was scared that they would be like pushed out of the group. And they played so many mind games with us as far as like comparing us to different boys. And everyone, it seemed like all the runaway boys and were always looking for an older guy to take care of them. So the boys, for some reason, they were not there that long. They were in and out within like a few months. And they would come and go. At one point, I remember they even had me. They wanted me to fly to San Diego and meet with one of Alan Kramer and Leslie Wexner's one of their antique dealers. And I was kind of scared to go because I was very young and I didn't want to go on the plane by myself. But they were actually sending the boys around to their friends. And I remember one time I did go to Toronto, and it was kind of like scary because I was young, and I did fly to Toronto. And the boys were, they would, even like with us boys, we would experiment with each other in different rooms. So they weren't just with Leslie or Alan or Richard Himmel or Harold Simon. We would actually experiment with each other also.
I have a question about the FBI raids. What year was the FBI raid? What was the
FBI raid? Okay, the first FBI raid was in '89. Yes, in '89, and the raid was in Philadelphia. Was the first raid, and I had like a lot of photographs and a lot of information. And they even took pictures off of the walls of different people. And what was crazy though then, okay, my experiences with Leslie, okay, the first experience I had with him was in the apartment, in Alan's apartment. And then at one point, Leslie was flying in from Ohio, and a lot of times they would fly into a private airport called Negs Field. And Leslie at that time was staying at the Hilton Hotel. And I remember I went to the Hilton Hotel on Michigan Avenue, and I walked in. It was a beautiful room. It was like almost like a mini suite, and there were French doors going into one of the bedrooms. And eventually, Leslie and I were in bed together, and he was gross. And he started sitting on me. Like, first he started sitting like on my chest and went down and wanted me to perform oral, and I just wouldn't do it. That's when he was like trying to get like almost sitting on my chest. But then he went and sat on and in no time at all, he is shitting all over me. It was so disgusting that I jumped up and I was gagging, and I had to go into the shower, and I took a shower, and I wanted to leave at that point. And he blocked me from leaving, and he said to me that I was not going, and he would not let me leave. He says everything was fine, and he calmed me down. But this is what was so strange. He had sheets in the room, and he changed the sheets. So I thought later on, why did he have those sheets in that room? He was planning on doing that to me. Because why would he have a set of sheets in the room?
Some of the documents that you'd sent me, I recall looking at, you were some mention of a residence where there was a dungeon built into the basement, and there was a series of bathtubs in the basement, and that you recalled seeing mostly Catholic boys that were placed in the bathtubs and urinated on.
Yes.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Okay, I'm going to tell you about that too. And I want to mention, and this is one of the reasons why, I mean, I am just like, as far as the FBI and the Department of Justice, okay, they're so corrupt. It's unbelievable. Because I reported everything to the prosecutors at the Department of Justice. I reported everything to attorneys in Philadelphia. I reported everything to the FBI, and I reported everything to a postal inspector in Philadelphia. And this was the late 1980s. And they told me that, oh, you're delusional. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're insane. Oh, you're anti-Semitic, because I had just repeated some of the things that all of these Jewish men were saying to us about Goyim and everything, and then I would repeat comments that they would make to each other. Mm-hmm. They would call each other they would say, oh, but they only called each other, but they would not allow anyone else to call them that. But they would call each other that. And I repeated that to the federal authorities and the FBI agent. And they started saying that I was an anti-Semite. And I'm like, no, I'm just repeating what was going on. And I repeated the Mafia parties to that. And the Mafia parties, they told me that I was delusional and they did not exist. There was no such thing. And the Mafia party was a party that they would, like, it was like an event that they would set up. You had the Mafia party for guys that were into young boys. And when I say young boys, okay, once you turn 15, you were too old. Mm-hmm. So they wanted them between 12 and 14. So they had Mafia parties that they would give on like a long weekend, and people would fly in from all over the United States and Canada and sometimes Europe. So they would have the parties in basements of either homes in Chicago, or they would have parties in mansions in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about estates. So the parties, I'll never forget it. At one point, there was always a sign. They would cut their nails very short. And eventually they said that they had to cut the nails short because the nails, if they were longer, it would tear the young boys because their skin was very sensitive and they didn't want too much blood all over the place. Yeah. So whenever they would cut their nails short, I kind of knew what was going on. And one evening, we got into Alan's Corvette, and it was only a 2-seater, and it was Leslie, Alan, and myself. And I just sit on Leslie's lap. So we drove to, this party was at Phil Pecklow's home. And we went into the home, and as I went downstairs, there was just unbelievable. They had slings hanging from the ceiling. and they had flower pot holders with Crisco oil hanging from the flower pot holders. And then they had, we're talking rows of bathtubs with young boys were in the bathtub, and it's very, very dark. And they would urinate and actually like shit on the boys. The smell was unbelievable, but they did have fans. Okay. And then they would actually have boys in slings, which I was in a sling in the past, and a couple of times. I didn't want to, I know that I did a few podcasts in the past, and they didn't want me to go into graphic details because of the fact they were afraid that their podcast would be taken down. But with this interview, I believe that I can go into details. But they would actually put their fingers in the Crisco oil and then shove their fingers in the bowl. And they did it to me too, which I don't like to talk about. And it was very painful, but they were always giving everyone Quaaludes and Librium. Librium. And I didn't know this, but it was one reporter that told me that was to relax us. And then Ryan Dawson, who's a podcaster, just recently sent me a message telling me that they gave you that to relax your muscle. So they would actually stick their fingers in and then they would try to pull it out, and they would walk around with Polaroid cameras and take pictures of they called it a rose. They would take pictures of it, and then there were binders of roses, and then they would show each other, and they were actually getting off on looking at the roses of underage boys.
The boys that you remember at the party, do you remember what the average age was? I know you said they aged out at 15.
Under 15.
Okay.
Because after 15, you were sent to other people. At 15, they introduced, I was 14 when they started introducing me to John DuPont. And what was strange, though, at the parties, there was so much blood everywhere that they had one person that would walk around cleaning up the blood that was on the floor if there was too much. And then several times they had to take actual bodies out of the parties. And they would always joke around, oh, we had to throw it in a dumpster. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know what they did with the body.
And just to clarify, the bodies that they were removing, were these individuals that had died?
They looked as if they were just numb. I just remember a couple of times where they would have the young kid, they were holding the young kid and taking them out. And Alan would joke around later on, oh, they just took him out and he's fine. They threw him in a dumpster. And that's another thing that was strange, okay? And I don't have any proof, though. There were always people jumping off of balconies. There were always drug overdoses. There were always boys that they claimed were getting by Johns from the New Flight Bar or Carol's Speakeasy or the Bijou Theater, where old John was the boys. And a matter of fact, when Hulu did the documentary on Leslie Wexner, they did research and they did find a couple of incidences where one of the guys jumped off the balcony. It was one of Alan's older boyfriends, evidently, who jumped off the balcony. And Lance Durfee, Mrs. Florsheim's hairdresser, would always say that he was murdered and that Leslie Wexner was the alibi. So, and evidently Alan was at the New Flight Bar, and Leslie Wexner was the alibi to state that Alan was with him that day.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to realize, too, they controlled everything. The entire gay scene was controlled by this group of Jewish men. And what's strange is that they would give money. There was this one guy, Chuck Renslow. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He was their main guy, the front. And they would give him unbelievable amounts of money to open up gay establishments and clubs in the city and sex shops. They were always giving him money. And at one point, it was so crazy. Alan took me to his attorney's office, and he wanted to leave me money if anything ever happened to him. He actually put me in his will, and that's what he would do to different people. And he would do that intentionally so you felt like you were close to them. So it was just unbelievable. And then, the situation at the hotel was horrible when he just went to the bathroom on me. Parties, the Mafia parties, the FBI tried to convince me that they did not exist. This was during the 80s. And then later on, people were able to locate online the Mafia party brochures and documents, and they actually set the party up in Chicago as a nonprofit.
How many parties do you recall attending?
Okay, then I went to another one in Highland Park, and it was at a mansion, and it was a huge mansion. It was an estate, okay, and they had like barns, and it was a huge estate, and they had a coach house, and I'll never forget it because it was the first kosher house I've ever been to, and it was a huge mansion, and I remember them walking us through the kitchen, and then taking us right downstairs. The house had an elevator, and in the basement there was an actual safe. The safe was set up like a jail cell, and they would lock you in the safe. And then what they would do, it was a huge, huge basement, and Richard Himmel would actually design the Mafia party spaces. And it was like they would call it their playroom. And they would show, like, for instance, on the weekends, I remember going on a tour of different people's playroom and in the city and in the suburbs. And they were proud to show their playroom off. And in this basement, they had the same setup. It was slings everywhere and bathtubs everywhere. They had enema rooms. And the parties, though, were not just young boys. Okay, they would separate them because you had guys that only liked young boys, and then you had men that like older guys.
Mm-hmm.
So they tried to separate the parties, and the parties were always normally on long weekends, and they were openly using drugs. And what's crazy is that they were so out of it, and the parties lasted all weekend at times.
Mm-hmm.
So they were so high and so drugged out of their minds that, I mean, I remember that they always had doctors there too that were actually participating. And the doctors would have to like help different people out.
The doctors were participating in the sexual activity.
Were participating in the activity, but they were also friends of theirs. And that's another thing. This is what was so strange too. They were obsessed with circumcision. They would have meetings about circumcision, and they would, I'll never forget where Leslie Wexner, and I can remember this, and I was probably 14 at the time. They would have meetings, okay, all the time at their apartments. And some of the meetings were only for Jewish people. If you were not Jewish, you could not be there. I remember when, like, relatives of the Pritzkers would come to Alan's house for dinner. They did not want to have dinner with anyone that was not Jewish. And this was the governor's family, the governor of Illinois, his family members. And they were obsessed with circumcision, and they wanted to make sure that all the hospitals in the United States circumcised boys, and they were like so focused on the propaganda as far as that the media was putting out with, they were trying to create that like an image that the circumcision had to be done for health reasons. And I remember at the time, they actually were just so obsessed with that, and they were always talking about the medical association and how as long as they controlled the medical association and the hospitals, and I asked one of my teachers why they were so obsessed with that. And one of the guys had told me that it was because when Hitler actually, everything that happened in Germany, they would pull down the boy's pants, and if he was not circumcised, then they knew that he was not Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted everyone in America to blend in so that they could make sure that everyone looked as if they were like, it was hard to tell. So that was like a big deal to them. And it was just so strange, some of the things that they did.
How old were you the last time that you had any contact with any of them?
Okay, let me tell you what happened. Okay, this is what's really strange too, and I find this interesting. No one would dig into the fact that Leslie Wexner was in Chicago. Now, Richard Himmel's daughter-in-law, Roxanne Himmel, acknowledged everything. She says, I'm glad that there's someone out there that knows the truth of what was going on. I was married to John Himmel. John knows everything that was going on. He knows the truth. She just acknowledged everything, saying that I'm glad that everyone that you know the truth of what happened, and we know the truth of what happened. And at the time, okay, like for instance, no one would focus on Leslie Wexner before he met Jeffrey Epstein. Mm-hmm. No one would focus on Leslie Wexner's Chicago years. Now, Leslie Wexner also attended Roxanne's wedding in Chicago. And Leslie's mother was very close to Lillian H. Florsheim, who I worked with. And I think I sent you a check from Lillian Florsheim.
Yeah.
I worked with her, and both of them, Bella and Mrs. Florsheim and Mrs. Wexner, they were both amazing, but they were obsessed with drag queens and transsexuals. And they would actually pay for men to get sex changes. And they'd send them somewhere in Las Vegas. I don't know where it was. But, and I went to dinner at Mrs. Florsheim's house one night with Bella, and everyone there was a transsexual. And they tricked me. I was a young boy, so I really didn't know anything about it. I thought they were all women. And then after the party, they said, well, could you tell? And I'm like, could I tell what? And I was like, I couldn't believe it because I was so young. It was all new to me. Mm-hmm. But toward the end, I would say, okay, at 14, 15, after I moved, started going to John's house, I would fly to Philadelphia and he would fly to Chicago. Lance Durfee and Lance had a major falling out with Leslie and Alan. And at the time, they were going to Mexico, bringing boys back to the United States. So through San Diego. From San Diego, they would bring them to Chicago. And Alan just started a lot of problems because he was promising everyone apartments. He was promising people money. He wasn't coming through. And Lance, I was with Lance, and he called the Mexican embassy because Alan eventually moved to Mexico. He moved to Acapulco, and he had to get citizenship. For some reason, they all left Chicago at the same time. Lincoln Higgy, our antique dealer, Leslie Wexner, Alan Kramer, they all left. So whatever happened, I don't know exactly, but they all left Chicago. And then Lance and mainly Lance, because I didn't know actually what I was doing, but I was with Lance. We called the Mexican embassy in Chicago, which I'm hoping that eventually they'll pull the file and release those documents, because Lance reported them for bringing young boys into the United States from Mexico. Mm-hmm. And which was really odd because all along they wanted white boys with a certain look, and Leslie Wexner wanted white boys, but at the same time, when he came the first time, he came with someone that could have passed for maybe Mexican or native, which I looked back and I thought that was odd. But everyone else that Leslie was with was white. And it was strange because they kind of changed what they were into. It wasn't just the white boys toward the end. Then they were starting to get involved in Mexican boys. Mm. So why, I don't know. I mean... Similar age ranges, like all under 15? All under 15. And Alan evidently could not get...
Oh, can you hear me still?
That?
The phone just cut out. The phone just cut out. I just missed what you said. You said Alan couldn't get sued?
Alan could not get citizenship in Mexico because of after what we did, as far as turning him in the early 80s, they would not allow him to become a citizen. And I remember when I was actually living in Philadelphia with John DuPont, they actually, I would talk to Lance, and Lance would say, oh, well, it worked. He's not able to get citizenship. And because Lance just had such a vendetta against Alan at that time and Leslie, that Lance was very proud that he was able to get that citizenship stopped as far as him becoming a Mexican citizen.
So early 1980s is when you were first reporting.
I would say 84, maybe 84.
84.
I'm not exactly sure of the actual date, but I am sure that the Mexican consulate in Chicago has to have documents regarding that.
Okay.
And it was all documented. And Lance was constantly calling them. And I just remember it was an older lady that he was talking to. And she knew him because evidently he had come into the Mexican consulate's office in Chicago to do his paperwork. And I'll never forget that I remember that she knew how strange he looked and she felt that he was very peculiar.
And then when you first reported again, that was early 1980s. Let me ask you, do you have, of all the times that you did report, what documentation do you have? Do you have lists of case numbers and we can discuss some of that, offline after.
Okay, yes. And As far as the Mexican embassy, no. I just know that Lance and I reported it. I mean, it has to be documented, and I know that if they pulled his file, they would see that Leslie Wexner and Alan Kramer were reporting.
Yeah.
Okay, they have to have that information because of his going back and forth from Chicago to Acapulco nonstop. And I sent you a picture of Alan Kramer, and it was so strange because Alan Kramer is sitting at Kramer Furs in Acapulco. Did you see that picture that I sent to you? At the bottom, there's a little, I'm like, wait, he opened up a furry in Acapulco? Come on, it's hot there. That was very strange. So maybe he eventually had to stay there and could not come back to America. I lost touch with him. And then let me explain what happened then, okay? I kind of after that, they introduced me to John DuPont. Mm-hmm. And John fell in love with me. And he would fly to Chicago back and forth nonstop and would fly me back and forth to Philadelphia. Sometimes I flew in a private plane, and sometimes I flew in an actual commercial plane. And eventually I moved to Philadelphia, and John had backed my company, which was DuPont Model Management, and everything is documented with the feds. And what had happened is I had mentioned to Bruce Weber, who was a photographer for Leslie and for the guy from Abercrombie and Finch. Mm-hmm. I mentioned to Bruce Weber about what had taken place with Leslie. Bruce started almost threatening me, telling me to shut up and I should not be telling everyone that story. Okay? Leslie called me at my office in Philadelphia at DuPont Model Management and started threatening me and told me that he was no longer gay and that he was getting married and he was no longer gay. So he threatened me, and then after that, that was it. That was 1989, and he said that he was getting married. And I had just totally forgot about everything and lost track. But I just told Bruce Weber everything because he was working with the entire group. And I told him everything, and Leslie called me at my office threatening me. And what was so crazy is that within 6 months, okay, John insisted that I change the name of DuPont Model Management. He insisted that I even got a phone call from Pierre DuPont, the former governor, informing me that I had to change the name of DuPont Model Management, that I could no longer use the name. And Leslie, when he threatened me, within 6 months, everyone started coming after me. And what happened is the late 80s, they did a hatchet number on me. I was on every talk show, even Geraldo. I cannot locate any of that footage. Anything. I was able to find old advertisements for DuPont Model Management, which I sent to you. I posted them online. I was able to locate old advertisements. But that's when I reported everything because the postal inspector started harassing me. Federal prosecutors started harassing me. And the one federal prosecutor, it turned out, her husband was related or is related to one of Leslie Wexner's business partners.
So with the harassment, how would you characterize the harassment? What was your perception at the time?
Oh, there's no words to describe it, okay? At the time, there was just so much. And when I went into detail about everything that had taken place, and the attorneys were trying to silence me, telling me that I was an anti-Semite, and that I was targeting Leslie, and I was targeting everyone and trying to let them know what Leslie was doing because I was an anti-Semite. And then when they told me that the Mafia party did not exist, I was furious at the time. And if you look back, okay, people can go to the clerk's office in Philadelphia, the federal clerk's office, and they can pull documents that were submitted with the federal cases against me where I'm exposing them all. And I'm talking about everything that was going on. There were 2 big binders of evidence that were all submitted to the court. And I went into detail about everything, and I had never seen anything like it. Okay, I had a lot of offices throughout the United States, and the takedown was so organized. Everyone that came after me was Jewish. And I think that that's very odd that everyone was Jewish. And then I felt it was odd that I was being accused of being an anti-Semite because I was reporting a group of Jewish men to the United States Attorney's Office. Now, I didn't know at the time that I was actually reporting them to other Jewish government attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And when I researched several of the government attorneys, they were ex-IDF officers. At the time, I never knew that. But now I was able to search them online, and they were even former IDF officers. And I'm sitting there trying to report what this group of very powerful Jewish men were doing in Chicago. So I was targeted and attacked from every area you can imagine. Every news outlet, it was so organized where within 2 days they stormed into every office. All the local news media. I was even on like 2020. We were on all the talk shows. We were everywhere.
And what were they accusing you of?
They were saying that what we were doing at the time was misleading, which it was not misleading at all. We never had one complaint or problem from any of the customers. What they did is they went online to make me look bad and to make the company look bad. And then they told the public to please call the United States Attorney's Office. Please call and report DuPont Model Management. And then they took all these complaints that people had that had called in, and they convinced the individual that they were misled. And it turned out to be this major issue over nothing. And what they indicted me for was mail fraud. They said that one of the newsletters that I had mailed out was misleading, that I printed something in a company newsletter that was misleading. And anyone out there can go to the courthouse in Philadelphia, the federal courthouse, and pull up the case and look at what they indicted me for. It was all a setup. And that was the first time I saw how corrupt the United States Department of Justice was and how corrupt the FBI was. They went to employees and threatened the employees with decades in prison if they did not testify and lie before the grand jury against it.
On mail fraud and in reaction
They said I mailed out a postcard and a newsletter that was misleading. And because they said that there was a misleading paragraph, they said it was mail fraud because I sent the postcard and newsletter out in the U.S. mail. But what was strange is before all of this happened, the United States Postal Inspector that was in charge of everything actually came to me and almost like threatened me. So that's what happened. And I mean, it was all mainly, I look back and it was like, I just believe that it was all because of what I did as far as reporting Leslie Wexner. Because when I reported him, they pretended like at first the information was major. And then at other meetings, they started calling me an anti-Semite. They started saying that I was delusional. There was no such thing as a Mafia party. And they just kept trying to make me look like as if I was the worst human on earth.
Well, that's unfortunate. I've actually been in contact with lots of victims, including some that have memories of similar abuse that you suffered with Leslie Wexner. So
yes, and now what's really strange too, and this is like, okay, Maria Farmer, okay, she had told me, she says, oh my gosh, they did the same thing. Alan Dershowitz did the same thing and used the former FBI director, Louis Freeh, to try to create dirt on the victims of Epstein. And they were trying to create dirt. And then what's really crazy, Juliet, one of the other victims, she came forward and said, recently, she tweeted about it, how Jeffrey would threaten to plant drugs in the apartments of some of the girls, the victims, regarding the Epstein case. But what's so crazy, that's the same thing Leslie Wexner said during the early 80s. So I sent Juliet a message and I said, Juliet, that's exactly what they said to me and other young boys. That they were going to plant drugs in our apartments and where we were living and at our families' homes. So it was so odd that was another coincidence where, and this is why people need to realize that Leslie Wexner was running the show. And the reason why I say that is because the Black Binders, Okay, they had black binders of all of us boys. They had black binders of the actual, they called it the rose, where the rectum was pulled out, that was just covered in blood. Okay, Maria said, "Oh my God," and so did Virginia. She's like, "It's unbelievable. That's exactly what Jeffrey had. He had books of girls, different young girls in binders." And I said, "That's exactly what Leslie had and Alan Kramer had." And then, okay, with the video cameras everywhere, everything was videotaped. And then with the drugging that Juliet said, that was exactly how we were threatened. So there was so much that Jeffrey evidently must have gotten from Leslie.
Well, I know that, like I'd mentioned earlier, Sasha has had some memories of some locations of farms and of individuals, including of Wexner. And his experience was that there was several individuals, including Trump, that were more actively involved in running the ring, and that Epstein was more of a, lower on the totem pole in terms of the ring functioning. And certainly there's a lot more evidence that I've reviewed and individuals that I've spoken to. I've a specific perspective I'm careful speaking about, just because lots of active cases, lots of active investigations. But what you've described is similar to what multiple victims have described, and is similar to evidence I've reviewed.
There's one other thing I want to mention too, which was very
Comfort slows you down. Reach for natural relief. Night and Day Hemp's extra strength CBD pain relief balm melts into aching muscles, delivering warmth you can feel. Soothe your body naturally. Feel free to move again. Night and Day Hemp balm melts away tension so you can enjoy every moment. Feel the difference fast. Real relief, real results. Order now at Night and Day Herbals.